Alrighty, welcome back again. In this video, we're going to be looking at inflation again, but we're going to be looking at the consequences, or the negative and possibly positive benefits of inflation, some of the consequences of deflation, and then we're going to look at the types. There's two different types of inflation that we'll look at, and the causes of those, and then we're going to evaluate the policies to deal with the different types of inflation. And we're also going to take a quick look at the monetarist view of inflation. It's a little bit different than the other two, so that's all this video will be. It'll be a little bit quicker than the last one, so I know you're all excited. All right, so let's go ahead and take a look at some of the different consequences of inflation. And up here it says greater uncertainty, redistributive effects, less savings, and damage to export competitiveness. And I'm going to add a couple more onto this. So we'll just go ahead start by making a list. So the first consequence of inflation is a loss of purchasing power. All right, and so what does that mean? It means that the dollars that you have, so if you have a dollar today, if there's inflation, then it will be worth less than a dollar later on. Okay, so let's just think of an example here. Let's say that you wanted to buy something that you were saving up money, and you saved it up and it was $100, and that's what the cost of the item that you wanted to buy. But then inflation happened, and that item that you wanted to buy became $110. And so now this $100 isn't worth as much. All right, and so you're going to need more of these. So the dollar, when you lose purchasing power of a dollar, the value of the dollar goes down. And so anybody who's saving money or a couple other things that we'll get to, they are definitely hurt by it. And so getting into that, you need to look at, when you look at consequences of inflation, the effects on people's savings. All right. So when think about it this way, let's say you have a savings account that has $1,000 in it. All right, and you hold on to it for 5 years. And so think of something that you could buy today for $1,000. And so, oh Lord, what could you buy today for $1,000? Let's say, kind of at a loss. Let's say a bike. All right, how about that? So you get a $1,000 road bike. Now, in 5 years, if we have inflation and you still have this $1,000, how much will this bike cost? And so let's say it costs $1,500 now. We had 50% inflation. And so now this $1,000 sitting here will not get you your bike. All right, the purchasing power of this money has gone down. And so if you have your money in savings, and this is one of the key points, if you have your money in savings, then any period of inflation is going to cause your savings to decline in real terms. All right. Now we talked about real versus nominal. Nominally, your savings will still be the same. It'll be $1,000, but in real terms, the value of that $1,000 is going to go down. And so, what do you think one good way to take care of this problem would be? All right. So if you have this $1,000 sitting in the bank, what could you do to to safeguard yourself? All right. And so what a lot of people do is they will buy assets that they think will increase with inflation. So the value of those assets, and could be houses, could be jewelry, could be a lot of different things. And so if you see inflation coming and you got $1,000 sitting in your savings account, you could let it sit there and the value would be slashed, or you could take it out and buy something, and hopefully that as inflation rose, because inflation is just a rise in the price level. And so if you're owning an asset that is rising with the rate of inflation, then once inflation's over, let's say it went up by this, your $1,000 might be worth 1,500. Okay, and so then you've protected yourself, and you really, in real terms, you wouldn't have lost any money. And so what I want to take a look at here for a second is one of the things that people really like to do is to buy gold when they fear inflation. And the reason is because if you own gold, then if inflation goes up, the theory is that so will the price of gold. And when inflation gets tamed again, the value of your gold would be worth much more than if you had just kept your money in savings. Then you can sell your gold, get your money back, and then you'll have conquered, or not conquered, but staved off the effects of inflation. So uh, as you can see, this is the gold prices from 1973 all the way to 2012 today. And so if you know this theory in the back of your head that during times of inflation or times of expected inflation or possible inflation, what do you think is going to happen to the price of gold or the demand for gold? All right. And so as you can see, back in the 70s, the mid 70s, the price of gold stayed right around 200 an ounce. And then you can see what happened in 79. All right. And if you go back in your economic history books, the late 70s were definitely a time of inflationary rates. All right. It would have been better to have had an inflation graph laid over top of this. But anyway, so 70s, time of inflation, so people started buying gold. The demand for gold went up. And then once they got inflation under control, gold prices stabilized again. Then during the 90s, early 2000s, people weren't very fearful of inflation. And then notice what happened. All right, they started ticking up here. But then in 2008, right around here, what happened? All right, the price of gold skyrocketed, and it's still pretty high. All right, and so you can look at this one of two ways. The big fear is that in response to the Great Recession, the Federal Reserve, which is the central bank of the United States, uh, who controls the money supply, dumped a bunch of money in to the to the to the economy to try to stimulate it to get aggregate demand shifted to the right and to try and boost the economy. And so some people are worried that, and we're talking a couple of $1 trillion here, some people are worried that all that money that's sitting out there is going to start at some point to get spent really fast. All right, and if it does, that's going to be inflation. And so you can see that for the last 4 or 5 years, the price of gold has gone up because people's fears have been that there's so much money floating around out there that they better get their money and put it into an asset like gold or other precious metal. The silver prices are the same, and some of the other metal prices are the same. But so this is people trying to protect themselves from inflation risks. Okay, uh, and some people might look at this and say this is a bubble and it's about to pop, and the price of gold is going to come way back down here, and therefore if you buy it up here, then you're going to lose a bunch of money. Other people might say, look, if inflation hits, then the demand for gold is going to rise even higher, and you might be up here. So anyway, I just wanted you to see what happens when you look at the effects of savings. And so the net effect of savings uh, in general, when you have inflation, what do you think happens to people's savings? And people's savings rate goes down because they take it out because they know that it won't be worth nearly as much. All right. Let me go ahead and clear this page so we can start kind of fresh. All right. The third effect is the effect on interest rates. All right, and so this is going to get into a little bit of international economics, and so let's do the supply and demand for money. Oops, let's not do the price. Let's say this is euros per dollar. All right, and so if we, well, let me back this up. I'm jumping ahead of myself, sorry. That's going to be our international effects. The effect on interest rates. If you'll recall, interest rates are n equals I plus pi e. All right, where n equals the nominal rate. Remember, this is what you and I see at the bank. So, all right, the I is the real interest rate. Oh, and that is what the banks earn off of their money, plus pi e is the expected rate of inflation. Expected inflation. And so if we have a big increase in the inflation rate up that way, even if the real rate, remember that's what the banks earn, that's their profit, so it might be 3% here, and if so the nominal rate would be this 3% plus whatever the expected inflation is. And so if we're going through a period of high inflation, then what's going to happen to nominal rates? And the answer is they will go up a lot. All right, and what impact does that have? So if we have an increase in the nominal rates, we would tend to see a decrease in consumer spending, a decrease in business investments, All right, possibly a decrease in government spending, and we will see a decrease in net exports, and we'll get to this one in just a second. All right, so let's go ahead and do that one now. Let me erase this whole thing again. And so we've shown that there's going to be an increase in interest rates. I'm just going to use the real rate, but, well, you know what? Let's not. Let's be a little more precise. There's going to be an increase in the nominal rate. All right, and so now, let me draw this, supply and demand. So let's do euros per dollar. So this is the market for dollars. All right, it's quantity of dollars, supply and demand, and so this is just saying how many euros does it take to buy one US dollar. And so let's say that right now it takes 0.8 euros. I'm just making that up. It's probably somewhere around there, but and so then we'll just call this the quantity. And so here's the thing: when interest rates go up, so let's say that you have the U.S. here and Germany here, and you are a German citizen, and you have $1 billion. All right, and so in Germany, let's say the interest rates are 4%. All right, and in the U.S., the interest rates are 8%. So as this German banker, who would you prefer to lend money to? All right, do you want to lend it to, because that's what you want to do with your money. You want to invest it and earn as much money as you can off of it. And so if you have $1 billion, would you rather lend it to Germany? Let's just say it's a direct loan to the government. So they're buying treasury bonds. All right, would you rather invest in treasury bonds with Germany and you earn 4% from your money, or would you rather invest your $1 billion with the U.S. and earn 8% off your money? And so you can look at that, and let me get the, well, anyway. So you're going to earn more interest when you invest in the 8%. So what's going to happen? In order to take your, and that shouldn't be $1 billion, that should be 1 billion euros. All right. I think it's, anyway. So we got 1 billion euros. So if you wanted to lend money to people in the U.S. because of the higher interest rate, the money is going to flow from Germany into the U.S. Now, in order to either buy U.S. Treasury bonds or to make other loans in the U.S., you need to take your euros and exchange them for dollars, because that's what we want here in the U.S. And so here's the market. So the demand for U.S. dollars is going to go up. All right. So now instead of paying 0.8 euros, now you got to pay 0.9 euros. All right. And so the quantity has gone up. And so what's happening to the value of the dollar? All right. So the value of the dollar, of the US dollar, is increasing. All right. And so that means if the value is increasing or it is appreciating, if the value is appreciating, then our goods, let's say US goods, become more expensive to export because now it takes, well, let me finish this. More expensive to export because now it takes more euros to buy a dollar than before. And so if you wanted to buy something that was $100, you're going to need more euros to buy it. All right, because when you exchange it, anyway, you'd need 80 euros, now you need 90 euros. So U.S. goods become more expensive to export, and on the flip side, foreign goods become cheaper to import. So let me pull this over here. So we have exports are going down because it's more expensive. Imports are going up. And so the net effect on net exports is that it will decrease net exports. And so we would say that this is an effect on the international competitiveness. All right, so that's, there we go, damage to export competitiveness. That's what this graph is all about. So real quick, the higher interest rates in the U.S. has caused more money to flow into the U.S. because people in other countries say we want to earn more interest by lending the U.S. government money at 8% than the German government money at 4%. All right, and so because you can just you can earn a higher rate of return, and so because more money flows into the U.S. in order to buy those treasuries, then the demand for the U.S. dollar goes up, causing the value of the dollar to rise. It becomes more expensive for people to buy our exports, and so our exports go down, and foreign goods become much cheaper, and so we buy more of that, which causes decrease in exports, increase in imports, a decrease in net exports as a whole. All right, and so that's what we mean by damage to export competitiveness. Now, is the consumer happy here? You bet, because the U.S. consumer is happy because they can buy more foreign goods at a cheaper price, but this is going to be a conversation we'll have later. All right, whoops, didn't mean to do that. There are 7 of these, just so you know. Let me get rid of that one. All right, so number 5 is it creates uncertainty. And so if you're a business and you see inflation going from 4%, and it goes up to 6%, and then 8%, and then 11%, and you see it going up, and then maybe it comes back down to 8%, and then up to 14%, are you going to want to make an investment in a big factor if you see inflation rates jumping up and down? And so, and this brings up a point I should have made earlier. Uh, this is all generally dealing with unanticipated inflation. All right, because if we can anticipate it, then we can deal with it and do what we need to do. But if it's not anticipated, if it just keeps springing up out of the blue and we don't know why, then that will cause a lot of uncertainty. Uh, it will decrease business confidence because if your government can't handle the inflation, then businesses are definitely going to be a little bit worried. And if business confidence goes down, then we would definitely see a decrease in business investments, and that leads to a decrease in aggregate demand. All right. The 6th one is labor unrest. All right. So you make, let's make you wealthy. Well, relatively wealthy. You make $100,000 a year. All right. And you're pretty happy with this. So this is you. Make 100,000. Not a bad salary at all. And so uh, let's say that this is your money and something happens and inflation goes up 10%. All right. And so you've signed your contract. That's a funky looking. Make that a little bit better. So you've signed there you go. So you've signed a contract that says you get a 5% raise every year. All right, and so in this, whatever year this is, you get an extra $5,000. So now you're making $105,000. And so are you happy about this? Okay. The problem is if you have a 10% increase in the rate of inflation, then in order to be able to have the same purchasing power as this 100,000, you would need 110,000. And so in real terms, what's happening to your income? In real terms, it's going down. And so you're not happy because the rate of inflation is causing your income to go down, your real income to decrease. All right, now how would this lead to labor unrest? Well, if prices keep going up but wages don't match, then you will definitely see a significant amount of labor unrest because now when you go to the grocery store, whereas you used to maybe spend $100 a week, if there's a lot of food inflation now, you might be spending $150 a week, and if your wages aren't keeping up, then it's you're not as well off. Okay, we'll put it that way. All right, and so that's what we mean by labor unrest. All right. Then the last one, number 7, is the distributive effects of income and wealth. Income and wealth. And so with income, the way that income can be redistributed is some jobs may see an increase in income. So you might have a job that it does go up maybe faster than inflation, or it goes up with inflation. Some jobs may see an increase in income. Or you might be in a job where you don't get an income match. Okay, your income doesn't match inflation. So some jobs may see a decrease in their real income. All right, and so these folks, very sad, these folks would be just fine, okay, because their income's going up. But as inflation has hit, some people who were making money are now not making as much, and some people who were making a little might be making a lot now. Okay, it depends. All right, and also on wealth, uh, let's say that you had assets that were uh, went up with inflation. Are you happy or sad about this? If you're holding on to something, say gold, uh, then you're pretty happy here. All right, one-eyed person. And so you'd be happy if you had assets that went up with inflation, and some assets might lose money, may not go up. And so if you're holding on to a lot of assets like that, and actually, if you are holding on to treasury bonds, then you are not happy because you're getting paid a fixed amount of interest, and we'll talk about this in just a second. All right, so that was all of those. All right, you know what? Let me skip. Just do this little list here. So let's just have this real quick conversation about the winners and the losers. Nice. The winners and the losers with inflation. And so if we're talking about people who are not happy, you'd have to look at lenders. They're not happy because if you lent money out at, say, a 5% interest rate, all right, so the nominal rate, this is the nominal rate, and then the real rate was maybe 3, and the expected rate was maybe 2. So you lent money out at 5%. All right, and so you lend somebody out $100, and at the end of the year you would expect 105 back. If inflation had gone up 2%, so 2 of those dollars would be inflation, and 3 of those dollars would be profit. All right, so that's your 5%. So what if inflation actually, instead of going up 2%, let's say it went up 7%. And so now you lent this $100 out, you're going to get back 105 because that's the contract, but this $100, the equivalent to break even, you need to get $107 back. And so if you lent money out at 5% and the rate of inflation was higher than you anticipated, you're going to be losing money because you're going to be getting paid back dollars that aren't worth as much, nearly as the ones that you had hoped to get in return. So if the lenders are sad here, who's happy over here? That would be the borrowers. All right, and so you could say, this is talking about the different stakeholders. One borrower would be individuals, would be happy. Businesses would be happy, all right, because they'd be paying. The idea again is that you're paying money back that's not worth as much as what you borrowed, all right. And also the government. You could argue the government would be happy because if inflation's going up, they're going to get probably more tax revenue because of higher incomes or higher revenue earned through inflation. And so they're going to be able to, when they pay the money back, the dollars that they have to pay back won't be worth as much as the ones they had borrowed. So borrowers are happy, lenders are not. What about people on fixed incomes? Let's say that you're retired, and you get $1,500 a month. All right. If you're able to live off of this, which you probably wouldn't be in the U.S., it would be tough, it'd be tight. But if you're able to live off of this, let's say inflation went up 10%. All right. Then that means that this $1,500 will buy 10% less than what it did originally. And so uh, if you're living on this fixed income, you're definitely not a happy person. All right. What about, let's see, long-term contracts? If you are the uh, the person who's doing the work for a long-term contract, let's say that you had signed up for a babysitting job. All right. This is going to get messy. So you signed up for a babysitting job, and you said, you know what, for the next 5 years, so people just had a kid, and you say, for the next 5 years, you'll be willing to babysit at $15 per hour. All right, and you sign a contract with the people. And so in the first year or two, you're okay. Let's say that there's just 3% inflation in the first year, 2% in the next year, 3% in the next year. And so, you're like, okay, this isn't terrible. What if 10% inflation hits? You are contracted at $15 an hour, even though the purchasing power of this $15 is a lot less than when you originally wrote the contract. Okay, so people who sign into long-term contracts, the people performing the labor, they would be not happy, and the people who were receiving the good or the service would be happy. All right, and so those are just some of the winners and losers when we deal with inflation. All right, so let's go back. I'll try and speed this up. It's a little bit longer than I thought, so I apologize. Discuss the possible consequences of deflation, and so this won't take as long. There are two types of deflation. All right, let me just draw these out real quick. So our short-run aggregate supply, aggregate demand, long-run aggregate supply, PL, Q, YF. Let's do this again. Q, PL. Okay, so this is going to be the good, and this is going to be the bad. We have two types of deflation. Let's use these again. So the good and the bad. All right, so the good inflation happens, and so remember, this is our price level over here. So we'll just say P1 there. That's YF. Then P1 here. And so this is, remember, this is our how we measure inflation. If this goes up, then we have inflation. If it goes down, we have deflation. So the good inflation would be, what if the short-run aggregate supply shifted to the right? All right. Let's say it was caused by a long-run shift. All right, and so there's our new full employment. So what happened to the price level here? Well, we had a decrease in the price level. We had an increase in output, and so this is definitely, people are going to be happy about this. All right, more stuff, lower price, and the more is important. And notice what's happened to employment. All right, it has not, unemployment has not gone up, employment has not gone down. Now the bad type of inflation is when there's a decrease in aggregate demand. All right, because now this is deflation, but it's caused, what's the big deal is, it's causing unemployment. All right, and so that's why this is considered the bad type of deflation. All right, and so the effects or the consequences would be, first, an increase in unemployment. This is going to be for the bad. All right, increase unemployment. The second is effects on investment and consumer or business confidence, effect on investment. So if nobody's buying the products, if there's high unemployment, so aggregate demand went down, there's high unemployment, businesses are going to be much less likely to invest, all right, because they don't know what the future is going to hold. The next one is the cost to debtors, people that borrowed the money, all right, just like, back, sorry, just like over here, the people who were, if you were a borrower, you were pretty happy because the dollars that you were paying back were not worth, they were worth less than the dollars that you borrowed. But conversely, if there's deflation, then the dollars that you're paying back, dollars are worth more. And so the purchasing power of the dollar that you're giving back to them for the loan that they gave you, that value of that dollar is actually worth more than the one that they lent to you. And so that's not a good thing. Then finally, there'd be likelihood of an increase in bankruptcies. Bankruptcies. All right. Now, this other idea of deflation is this is the example I always like to give. Let's say that you were in the market for a refrigerator. All right. And you saw that the price was $900 in May. All right, and you didn't need one. Yours didn't break or anything. So now we start to have some deflation. So you decide, you know what, maybe I'll hold off in May. And now the price drops to $800 in June. And you say to yourself, do I want to buy it now? Do you want to buy it at 800 or do you see a trend? And so you say, let's wait. Let's go to July. And now it's 700. And so the problem is that when people see deflation happening, sometimes people will wait to purchase. And so if they're waiting, imagine that you're just picking one out of the blue, Kenmore, and you're making these refrigerators. You've got, since if you were producing and nobody's buying, and you've got a whole warehouse full of refrigerators, what are you going to do? Are you going to keep making them, or are you going to stop? And once you stop, what's that going to cause to happen? That's going to cause unemployment to go up. All right. And so that's kind of one of the big problems with deflation. So deflation, we think prices are going down. This is a great thing, but not necessarily. Deflation can ruin an economy. All right, and if it's brought on by a decrease in aggregate demand. All right, this is our last slide. So I'll try and get through this second to last slide. So explain using a diagram that demand pull inflation is caused by changes in the determinants of aggregate demand. All right, this won't take but a second. So this is demand pull inflation. All right, so let's draw our graph. Short run aggregate supply, aggregate demand, that should be quantity of GDP. It's full employment. It's price level 1. And so all demand pull inflation is saying it's a decrease, changes in determinants of aggregate demand. And so remember that's C plus I plus G plus NX. So demand pull inflation is when there's an increase in aggregate demand. So increase in aggregate demand brought on by a change in one of these. So consumers' confidence may go way up, so that would cause that to go up. There might be a new technology, or interest rates may drop for some reason, and businesses are going to invest more. Government spending may start to jack up, or net exports, whatever reason. But any of these will cause aggregate demand to go up. And when aggregate demand goes up, notice what happens to the price level. The price level goes up. Also notice, and we're going to get back to this in another video, what happens to unemployment. All right, well, that's our natural rate, and so unemployment actually went down. So we're going to look and see later that there's this trade-off in the short run between inflation and unemployment. If we get more inflation, typically we get less unemployment. All right, so this is demand pull inflation. All right, let's do this other one. The next one is called cost push inflation. All right, so let's draw that out real quick. Q GDP, price level, short and aggregate supply and aggregate demand. Let's just draw it at equilibrium, full employment, and aggregate supply. There's the price level. All right, so cost push inflation simply says, and sometimes it's known as wage push. And so if there's any, and it's not just wages, but if there's any increase in wages, what's going to happen to the cost of business? The cost of business is going to go up. Whenever the cost to businesses rise, then you're going to see a shift to the left of the short run aggregate supply curve, which causes an increase in inflation. All right, and notice this is where that short-term trade-off between inflation and unemployment does not exist, and we'll get to that in just a little bit. But so an increase in wages or it could be an increase in the cost of any of the factors of production. So any of the factors of production, uh, increased costs. This is going to cause short run to shift to the left. Now, it could be, what about the exchange rate? Could that have any impact on it? Definitely. If all of our imports get more expensive, any of the raw materials that we might be buying from overseas would cause prices to go up. There's several different factors, but anything that costs the businesses more money will shift the short run supply curve to the left, and the price level will rise. All right. Now let me show you this, and then we're going to come back and look at these policies real quick. This is the monetarist view of inflation. The monetarists have this thought, MV equals PQ, where the M equals the money supply, V equals velocity, P equals the price level, and Q equals real GDP. So the monetarists think that inflation is caused because there's too much money. All right, and so the equation here would say this is the money supply. So let's say there's $100 in the economy. Velocity is how many times that money is spent. So let's say it's spent 5 times. Then we know this together is nominal GDP. And so we know that the nominal GDP here would be $500. All right. Now, so the monitors say, look, if the money supply gets too high, then that's going to cause inflation. If the money supply gets too low, that's going to cause deflation. So money supply is where it's at. If you control the money supply, you control inflation. And some people would say, you know what, let's just constantly increase the money supply at 3%. And that way we would anticipate somewhere around a 3% level of inflation. Businesses would know this is called inflation targeting. Some countries do it, some countries don't. We do not in the U.S., but it is up for debate. So anyway, this is the monetarist view that too many dollars chasing too few goods. All right, so they would argue that this is the cause, and this will cause an increase in aggregate demand. All right, and so that's the problem. Okay, last little bit. Let's look at these different policies, and this won't take as long as you think. So if we have, first you need to identify the type of inflation. All right, and so if we have demand pull inflation, it's going to be there, short run aggregate supply, aggregate demand, long run aggregate supply, FQGDP, PL, PL1. And so the goal is to get aggregate demand back there. Now, we can look at fiscal policy, and if you'll recall, fiscal policy is the federal government. So in the U.S., this would be the president and Congress. And we can do some different things with fiscal policy. I plus G plus NX. So remember, we want to get taxes, get aggregate demand down, so we could raise people's taxes. That's always popular. Not. We could decrease government spending. That's always popular. Not. And so one of the problems that we have with fiscal policy is it is not a very popular way to do it. So in the U.S., generally the job of dealing with inflation falls to monetary policy, which is a government central bank. And in the U.S., it is the Federal Reserve. And they're the ones who control the money supply. They control the money supply, which in effect controls interest rates. All right, and so let's just look at it real quick. If you are the chairman of the Federal Reserve, Ben Bernanke, and you see that we have inflation, what do you need to do to interest rates to cause aggregate demand to go down? And so hopefully you can just look at that and say, you would want to raise interest rates. And you would do that by cutting back the supply of money. And so if you raise interest rates, consumer spending will go down, cars, big ticket items, durable goods, business investments will definitely go down, government spending hopefully will go down, and net exports will go down, as well because of the stuff that we talked about earlier. All right, and so these would be the ways to deal with demand pull inflation. All right, and the last bit is dealing with cost push. So drawing the graph for cost push, short aggregate supply. You know what? Let me draw that a little bit different to make it look like we actually have inflation. SRAS, LRAS, aggregate demand. All right, so cost push, that means that we've had a shift of the supply curve to the left and prices are going up. Now, here's one of the problems, and this is the worst case scenario. Okay, this is bad. This is often called stagflation, when you have an increase in inflation and an increase in unemployment. All right, and the reason that this is bad is that what can the federal government do? All right, if they use demand side policies, so if they want to correct for inflation, they would, pull interest rates down. I mean, they would want aggregate demand to come down, and they would do that by increasing interest rates. All right, the Federal Reserve would, the central bank. And so we could get it down. And so if we shift aggregate demand this way, we can pull inflation down, but look what's happening to unemployment and output. All right, so that's a bad thing. Or if we wanted to deal with unemployment here, we'd say, you know what, let's shift aggregate demand up. We can do that through monetary and fiscal policy, but so we have a decrease in unemployment, but look what would happen to inflation. All right, inflation is going to go way up. All right, and so fiscal and cost push, make this point, fiscal and monetary policy does not work. And so think back to the section that we've done just recently on unemployment. This is where you need supply side policies. Oops. Supply side policies to shift the supply curve back to the right. And so by doing that, let me switch colors here. So if this is our original supply curve, we want to shift it to the right. All right, and by doing that, now we've brought inflation back down. All right, and so you can go back and review some of the supply side policies, but remember there's a difference between interventionist, this is where the government gets involved, and market-based. So I'm not going to go into that here because we've already done that. So anyway, and you should be able to evaluate these different approaches. All right, and definitely be able to evaluate aggregate demand and its impact on cost push. All right, so I think that's it. A little bit longer than I thought. I apologize, but anyway, we will stop there. And until next time.